Hello out there. I'm Dr. Peter Litchfield. Please call me Peter. I'll be Peter throughout all the work that Wolf and I'll be doing together. And this is Wolf Fellner. We're both um, members of the board of the nonprofit organization. It's a corporation, nonprofit of the United States, a 5013C called Breathing Science, hence Breathing Science on the Air. And we're going to introduce to you three things here. One, ourselves. Number two, the nonprofit. And number three, the podcast that we're going to be doing. Just very briefly, I think our whole approach to everything we do is conversational. Nothing is planned except just the general topic that we may be talking about in a particular podcast, including today. What occurs to us will come up conversationally. So why don't we start with an introduction by Wolf. Wolf could introduce himself, and then I'll introduce myself. Wolf Fellner.
Hi, everybody. My name is Wolfgang Fellner. My English-speaking friends call me Wolf. And I am part of this nonprofit organization, as Peter already mentioned. We have a board. We have established this organization with the name Breathing Science Incorporated, and our name is our program. So we are really all excited and want to promote a field that we call breathing science. And I have been introduced to that by Peter almost 9 years ago. I have been for a long time interested in understanding well-being and understanding the meaning of good life. And I was studying political economics because I understood that economics and economic circumstances are very important to well-being and the good life. And I became an associate professor of economics, and on the way I realized that there are so many challenges in our understanding what that means in the first place. So I had to go and learn philosophy of science to understand, the challenges in creating knowledge in academia. And I was going to the field of experimental physics and to biology and several other areas in academia on my quest to really understand what I was looking for. And at a certain point, when I was already teaching economics, and I realized that I'm facing some personal limitations when I'm teaching. I'm facing some personal limitations when I play the trumpet. I'm facing some personal limitations when I do scuba diving. And turns out those limitations were related with breathing. So I became interested in breathing. And I was doing all kinds of things about breathing. And I learned that breathing is very closely related to emotional things. And along the way, at some point, I met Peter. And Peter was bringing together in the first training I was doing with him, the emotional component, the mental component, but also the physical, the body as a component when he was talking about something that is psychophysiology. And when I was learning about that struck me because I was understanding that this way of that breathing can be a way that really transcends all these separations that we have, in academia or in all kinds of techniques, cultural techniques that we are confronted with. And I realized that in order to improve my own well-being and help people to improve their well-being, learning about breathing science. And breathing science can be a crucial step. and the huge thing that nobody talks about and nobody teaches. So so that's when and since 2021, I decided to make breathing science the center of my professional life. And Peter and I have been working together since we have met in 2017, and we're trying to bring to you breathing science as a field that is very different from what you probably have come across. And I'm very excited about this project, and I'm sure Peter is as well. So welcome, and I'm very happy to learn from you, to at some point get in contact with you in whatever way that might possibly happen. So Peter was already mentioning that this is very conversational. Peter and I, we both have a strong background in academia. We are both people who are very curious, and we are both people who try to keep an open mind. So we really think of ourselves, and I hope I know, Peter, I can talk for the both of us in this respect. For us, learning is not something where you can, where you can make mistakes. For us, learning is really something that involves criticism, that involves debate, that involves maybe even very firm discussion sometimes. But that's really, and that's a nice thing about the way we want to understand and the way we want to discuss about breathing science with you, by virtue of just having interesting conversations, having discussions, and having critical takes on whatever comes across and is related to the field we want to talk about. Okay, Peter, do you want
Thank
to
you.
introduce yourself, or do you
Yes,
want to
absolutely.
comment
Thank you.
already on what I was saying, or how do we proceed?
One thing I want to point out that we really share in a very important way is our appreciation for the philosophy of science. I'm a scientist. I've been a scientist all my life. And so is Wolf. Wolf comes, as he pointed out, from the field of economics, whereas I come from the field of psychology, behavioral science, and physiology. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background. I started in zoology, and I had a special interest in evolutionary biology. And when I was 18 years old, I had a research grant to look at the role of vocalization in frogs in their evolution, and how basically a species can move into a place of speciation, that is, a separation of populations of organisms by virtue of their behavior, not just by virtue of geography. And as a result of that behavioral separation, they may emerge as different species. So I was interested in behavior, very early on. I was first interested in zoology when I was started to be able to walk. I was going to be a field biologist or a field zoologist. And so but that changed over time during my bachelor's degree at the University of Michigan back in 1959 to 1963. Yes, I'm an older man. I'm 85. I'll be 85 this year. Maybe we'll celebrate my birthday for a minute or two in one of these podcasts at the time. But nevertheless, I got interested in animal behavior. A psychologist at the University of Michigan kind of persuaded me to look at animal behavior, and I got fascinated as I came out of zoology into psychology. And then my life kind of changed. I ended up in Latin America. I have a long history of being in Latin America, speaking Spanish, married somebody who is from Guadalajara and had 2 children with her. It was a big part of my life. And during that time, I kind of separated from the field of both psychology and zoology for a year and a half or 2 or something like that. And I came back into psychology, believe it or not through physiology and through science, but through existential philosophy, existentialism. what that's about philosophically from a more humanistic kind of perspective. And then I met an amazing man who was the only mentor I've had as an adult, Dr. Jerome Sattler, who's now passed on. He was a major name in personality theory and in intelligence testing. And so I went into experimental personality with my interest in existentialism through Jerry Sattler at San Diego State University, where I did my master's degree. In personality, experimental personality research coming down through existential philosophy. I took a course in existential thinking and existential psychology. And then I went for a PhD and came back to physiology, came back where I started, looking at physiology and as a learning system. And when I graduated my PhD from the University of Portland, I left there in 1970, became a professor of psychology, where I was for 11 years there and became a tenured associate professor that time, went on a sabbatical in the field of hypnosis and altered states of consciousness during that time. But again, my background at that point was very physiological, psychophysiological, and I specialized in behavioral medicine and in behavioral pharmacology, and really became what I call a behavioral physiologist, where we look at physiology as a learning system, as a psychological system. That physiology, by its very nature, is a psychological enterprise. And that's how I got into breathing. Okay, because my real mission became trying to show people how physiology is a psychological enterprise. That's very different than mind-body kinds of thinking, where you're talking about how the mind has this huge effect on physiology, and of course, physiology affects the mind. That's not how I come to it. That physiology, from the very start, from the time that it came into existence, the first organism on this planet, that's when psychology was born, because that's what physiology is. Okay, so how was I going to bring that to other people? Well, breathing became my mechanism for teaching that. I didn't come into breathing because I had a breathing problem. I didn't come into breathing because I was interested in relaxation. I didn't come into breathing to achieve altered states of consciousness or any of that. In fact, to me, the whole idea of using breathing to relax, for example, well, honestly, was boring. I had no interest in these things. To me, life was about adventure and about excitement. I had no interest in what I thought breathing was about. It's about, toning down and relaxing and feeling better because, you're getting involved in your breathing, and you're learning how to breathe properly. And that to me I had no interest in this. So I came into it through the chemistry, through the physiology of breathing, and then the behavioral side of it integrated with that. And so it was a way for me to help people understand physiology as a behavioral enterprise. Okay, then the second reason I came in is because I was startled, amazed, flabbergasted, as we used to say, flabbergasted by the findings that 60% of people in the major US cities were 60% of the ambulance runs in the major cities in this country were a result of dysfunctional breathing, where people would suddenly start to breathe in a particular way that brought on radical symptoms and deficits, and they would call emergency in the United States, 911, we call, and you end up with an ambulance. I couldn't believe that. My God, how could that be? And that all came around through my closest friend of 55 years, Robert Freed in New York, who's retired years ago. He's coming up on 91 years old. Bob brought a capnometer to, I had this organization I ran called the Professional School of Biofeedback Training many years ago. And Bob was there to do part of a course. He brought a capnometer with him. And this is where it all began in 1984 with that capnometer. And here I am today. So what I do today, I'm the president of the Professional School of Behavioral Health Sciences. where we put out all kinds of programs in breathing. We're one of the sponsors of the nonprofit. We contribute to the nonprofit. We support the nonprofit and what we do. And we have different programs in breathing. I'm not going to go into here. It's irrelevant to what we're doing. But I run that organization. And then I'm also the founder and the CEO for Better Physiology, which is a manufacturer of capnography instrumentation, which I think it's kind of obvious where that came from, given my description. That's what I do. And I'm really looking forward to working with Wolf. Wolf and I have a great time together. We talk about everything. We bring in all kinds of personal things as well. And we're going to be inviting people to join us all along, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that's basically my background to give you some sense of it. That's eclectic, from existential philosophy to fundamental physiology. But Wolf, with his background in what I consider science, economics, and our interest in the philosophy of science, we're going to talk a lot about science and breathing and what we call breathing science, which brings us to the nonprofit. So I've said enough. Why don't we see what Wolf has to say about the nonprofit, and then I'll step in along the way. Wolf?
Peter, listening to you is like makes me talk about so many things that are, important for understanding what breathing science might be. And I will come back to that because I think that's the idea or part of the idea of this introductory podcast, to give you a rough overview or give you a rough idea why we think breathing science should be a field and how it can be distinguished from other things like teaching certain breathing techniques or all kinds of modalities that exist around breathing, or how breathing is dealt with in a medical context or in whatever context, because there are so many different applications and ways to look at breathing out there that we should address and that we should put into perspective. But before we can do that, I think we should talk about what the nonprofit organization is. And Peter and I have, together with a very dedicated team on the board of directors, established this nonprofit organization in order to promote knowledge around breathing and the profoundness and the importance of knowledge around breathing to everybody should have become obvious to you after what Peter just said. I mean, just the statement that physiology is psychological. I mean, we have, we're dealing with physiology all the time. We're dealing with health issues, we're dealing with mental issues, we're dealing with all kinds of things. But this statement is so profound in how we deal with those things. And that breathing can inform the way we deal with relations, the way we deal with our bodies, is so profound that I think breathing science, the field of breathing science, can really bring some interesting new ideas and a new way of looking at yourself, looking at our cultures, how we deal with health, for example, how we deal with human flourishing, how we deal with well-being, like I mentioned, that was driving me. So I think breathing science and the idea of the nonprofit organization is to have a platform where we can discuss those things from a critical scientific perspective. So
I might add something to this, and that is that when you think of breathing, there's so many people who bring breathing into what they're doing. I mean, take the field of yoga or Buddhist philosophy. I mean, breathing is a very important part of that, right? I mean, there's an immense population of people who bring breathing into what they do as experts in meditation in yoga, for example. And these people are, to a great extent, isolated and cut off from other groups, say, looking at pulmonary medicine, looking at respiratory physiology. Now, some of these people may be involved in yoga and so on, of course, but it's a field that's separate, really separate from yoga and meditation and so on, and it's considered to be perhaps the most challenging section of medicine. If you were to carve it up into all its different categories, I have read, for example, in the Bible of respiratory physiology and medicine and so on, a book that you would not have heard of, but anybody who knows respiratory physiology knows of it. They state in there that respiration as physiology touches every aspect of medicine, every aspect of medicine. And it's a metaphor for how it touches us in our daily lives. They say it's the most challenging part of medicine at large is, the pulmonary sector of the field, because it touches everything. It touches the brain, it touches the kidneys, it touches everything. And so, and it's brought in, and it's integrated in medicine from a certain perspective, but it's not integrated out here with everything people are doing in the area of breathing. It's not coming together. People use it for relaxation. They use it for achieving altered states, like, say, holotropic breathing, where you explore yourself psychologically. I mean, it's just all kinds of groups doing different kinds of things. Some people use breathing as a technique. It's all about a technique to achieve certain objectives. Other people are looking at breathing as something we do every day. How do we breathe every day, and how does that affect us? That's one thing we're really interested in. It's something we're doing all the time. It's not something we do when we're stressed. It's something we do every second. And how is that affecting us? Okay. So we're interested in bringing together all these people. Let's see all of us contribute so we can help each other and be friendly towards each other. So when you see Wolf and I get all worked up and critical, which you will see, because we're both kind of emotional people, and we aren't very boring. You may not agree with us, but we won't be boring. I promise you that. Okay. And so, there's a lot of mistakes that are being made out there, like in any field, whether it's law or medicine or economics, it doesn't matter, we just don't have all the knowledge in one place. So there's a lot of mistaken kinds of thoughts about what breathing is and how it affects us and so on. And we want to address that. It's very important to look at that. And our guests will present their perspectives as we will ours. And we're going to move through a lot of interesting things. Our first podcast will probably be carbon dioxide. We'll talk about carbon dioxide. It's amazing the misconceptions about carbon dioxide out there. You wouldn't believe it. Or maybe you would. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, I wanted to add that because we're trying to bring everyone together, and we want to do it in a way that's constructive and that we can address the misconceptions that are out there. Of course, we want to learn in this process ourselves. We don't consider ourselves to be the end all of this. We just have our perspectives, and we're going to come on strong around those things with our ears open and ready to have a conversation. That's what we want to do. Have conversations with interesting people on interesting topics around breathing. So you have something you want to add to that, Wolf?
No, I just can confirm, the importance of bringing those different perspectives on breathing together. And I've just had 2 days ago, I've had a client, and she is a yoga teacher and a Pilates teacher, and she is a meditation teacher. And you were mentioning dysfunctional breathing, and I haven't seen a person that suffers so much from dysfunctional breathing for a long time. And I see a lot of people as clients, and she is really suffering she has a lot of symptoms, and she has a lot of issues. And especially, you think this is the kind of person that has a lot of training and that knows a lot of breathing, about breathing, right? And then you see, okay, you can know a lot about breathing from a certain perspective and be completely blindfolded from another perspective. So the importance of bringing those different things together, the physiology, the emotional component, that the relaxation part, whatever the different parts are. And from me, breathing science is where we can bring those things together, right? Where we don't exclude, but where we have an integrated view that allows us to reflect in a way that we can really criticize, right? So we can criticize and we will criticize, but not with the intent of being destructive, but with the intent of initiating a learning process that takes breathing out of these. Everybody does what everybody is doing, and nobody knows what the
It's
effects are. Right?
not really so much a question of correcting what people are doing. It's offering them something additional that they might be able to do in what they're up to. So they can have a more expansive, more comprehensive notion of other things that may have an impact on what they're doing now. And so it's friendly. It's friendly. We are friendly people, both of us. Remember that. Okay. So, but in any event, we're really excited about being able to do this. And I think now what we might want to do is talk about the podcasts themselves and what we're doing there. Do you want to start into that, Wolf, about the podcasts and how we're going to be proceeding on that?
Yes, I mean what is a good platform for talking about breathing? I mean, we already mentioned that breathing plays a role, or a lot of people use breathing techniques or bring breathing into their work, and we want to talk with people who do breathing science work. We want to talk with people who bring a certain perspective, and we want to discuss. And so we're the idea of breathing science on the air is to have like we mentioned, to have an interactive format where we invite people, where we act as hosts. We ask questions. We ask questions, in order to bring awareness of what people do, to what extent breathing is relevant to their work, and also bring awareness to the limitations and the possibilities. So we're open to also for suggestions. We have an idea of whom we want to invite, whom we want to start out with. And we are ready and available and open for suggestions.
Yeah, and a good example, and a good example of that would be a gentleman who will be coming in one of our podcasts coming up, who played a major role in the Special Forces of New Zealand, and has really taken breathing professionally into all kinds of interesting places, like working with the elite police forces in the UK, working with the British Navy, and how they're bringing, breathing and respiration, which, by the way, we consider to be two different things. They're not the same thing. And in a lot of languages, it's the same word, even though they're different things. But we're not going to go into that now. But he will come in and tell us about how they're doing, for example, how they use breathing, how breathing is relevant to disarming a bomb. I mean, that's really interesting. Very specific stuff, fascinating stuff. And there are many examples like that. And
Right.
we'll really be conversational. We'll interrupt each other, because we're excited about what we're doing. And then we'll step away and, we'll have fun. The idea is to have fun. And if you get worked up and irritated and so on about something we're saying or someone is saying, that's fine. And we'll call on you because the floor will be open, and we'll have someone who, when you put in a message into the chat of Zoom, we have someone, an administrator in the background, who'll be looking at these chat questions, and then we'll take questions and we can address some of the things you're interested in, including maybe questions about your own breathing, where you wonder about, is there a problem or something, or could breathing be involved in this or that? Remembering that this is, when we talk about these things, this is about education. We're not going to offer medical solutions to medical problems ever. This is a conversation about breathing as a behavior, as something we do every day. I mean, breathing is not owned by the medical profession or some profession. It's what we are all doing. Every single cell in our body is doing it all the time. We all own it, and we can talk about it and what we think about it, and that's what we'll be doing.
Right. So, and we do that from the first moment of after our birth, right? So we will talk about pregnancy and birth and how breathing is relevant.
Correction. It didn't happen at the time of birth. It happened when the two cells came together, the egg and the sperm. Respiration is fundamental to a cell. Breathing, however, you have to be born to breathe. But that doesn't mean respiration hasn't been going on. It's been going on. This is a good example of how breathing and respiration are two different things. You didn't breathe till you were born, but you were respirating from the very start. So we just kind of get into things. And if we get down a boring kind of track, we'll switch. We promise you. Go ahead, Wolf.
Different fields that we're going to look at. I, for example, worked with musicians. Being seen has, for a lot of us, a strong emotional effect, strong effect on nervous system, strong effect on all kinds of things that happen in our bodies and in our minds and in our emotions. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot of different applications. And yes, I mean, I think one of the important things for me also to talk in this first introductory podcast is for you to get a little feeling of the notion of breathing science. And you mentioned something, Peter, that is also, I think that is crucial there. You mentioned your work around behavior. And breathing is behavior. And the implications of that very simple sentence or that very simple statement cannot be overestimated. Because that has so huge implications. And one of them is that breathing is learned. So we're dealing here with things that are like part of yourself. You were mentioning, Peter, that every one of us is breathing. So we're owning our breathing. And that is also embedded in the statement that breathing is behavior. Because it's what we have learned, it's who we are. And very often breathing is seen as something that can take us somewhere or something that is a tool to achieve whatever, because breathing has an effect on the nervous system. Breathing is related with our emotional regulation. It's related with that nitric oxide release in our body and so many other things. So we can achieve a lot through breathing. But what is breathing in the first place? And why it's important to look at it from a scientific perspective.
Said enough about the three things: who we are and why we're here, and what the organization is and what our mission is with it, and what we're going to be doing during the podcast. You've got a little feel for how we interact and are so comfortable with each other and can talk about virtually anything. And he comes from a very different professional background than I do, but we have so much to share because the basic understandings are the same. And one of those is about the philosophy of science that we're both very, very committed to and interested in, which no doubt you'll hear something about as time goes on. Anything else you want to say, Will?
Do you think we should that you think that that should be the end of this episode, or you don't want to
Yes, I
talk
think
about
this is
science?
just an introduction so that people know who we are before we kick off the first one, which is, I believe we've scheduled carbon dioxide, and you can look on the website to see the schedule of the different things that we're doing for the next 6 months or so. We have sponsors, by the way, and sponsors are people who contribute to the cause. They make donations. Again, we're a nonprofit entity, and we have a sponsored day, a sponsor kind of podcast that we do ever so often, where we ask our sponsors to come in and speak for 15 or 20 minutes about what they do in their enterprises. And we want to find out what these people are doing, what they're up to, how they're including breathing in their professions and how they make a living doing that. There's the business side of it too. How can you get involved and bring breathing into what you're doing? So we have a special sponsor podcast ever so often that you'll see scheduled. So I think maybe that's it for now. We'll be sending this out to our mailing list, and we look forward
Okay,
to having you subscribe and participate and be a member of what we're doing. Be on the air with us. This is Wolf's
right.
brainchild on the air. Breathing science on the air. I think that's pretty amazing. So here we are. We're on the air.
Well, I mean, that's what connects us, right? For the air that we breathe in and that we breathe out, that air that includes the CO2, which has been a part of us, the air that includes all those other gases that have been breathed in and out by people, not just for generations, for millennia. And so let's keep that connection alive and be aware of it. And let's be on air together.
We'll see you soon. We're looking forward to it. Bye for now.